So he's a professor of creative writing at Ashoka University. He earned his bachelor in English honors from Jadavpur University. Translates classic, modern, and contemporary Bengali fiction and non-fiction into English and from English to Bengali. So long time back, Rama Guha, who is a historian and thinker, talked about the lack of bilingual intellectuals. The translators are bilingual intellectuals. I look at them as bilingual intellectuals. So over 80 of his translations have been published so far. He has won and been shortlisted for several translations awards. He has conducted translation workshop for British Center of Literary Translation, University of East Anglia, University of Chicago, Dhaka Translation Center, Jadavpur University, and mentored translations around the world. Besides India, his translations have been published in UK, USA, Australia, and several other European and Asian countries. Through further translation, his research interests have focused on the translation of fiction, non-fiction, poetry between the languages of India, including English. So in this session, this is just a brief biography about him. So here he continues to engage in translation studies and not just teach it, but do it. So with translation, there are several conceptions, misconceptions, and I will start with a few with questions. Whatever time we have, maybe half an hour. Volunteers, we have half an hour. हमें आधा घंटा है हमारे पास. ठीक है. दूसरे सेशन ईच सेशन वाला हो जाएगा. हम दूसरे के सेशन खा जाएंगे. So how has it been the experience of being a translator? That is one. Why you chose this path, and why you continue to do, and does that excite you to translate from one language to another and another language to another, one back and forth? Given translation as a specialized subject, there are doubts about exact translation. The idea is lost in translation is always used. ओ भाव चला गया, अनुवाद में भाव चला गया. हमको सब लोग बोलता है कि भगवत गीता पढ़ना है, संस्कृत में पढ़ लो. मोहनदास करमचंद गांधी का कमेंट्री लिखे हैं, उनको मत पढ़ो, वो पॉलिटिकल साइड है. So we'll come back to those things, but point is, what do you mean by translation? I'm asking a practitioner and professor. What is its role in literature? How difficult it is as a practice? And what would you recommend to someone like me and others who want to become translators?
Okay, thank you for having me this afternoon. I don't think you need to explain what the importance of translation is in literature. How poor okay, I will give you a specific example. 100 Years of Solitude was translated into Japanese last year, which means entire generations of Japanese reading people had not read the book. Had not read the book since it was published in 1967, I think. So what a poor life it must be if you cannot read a work such as this. So that I rest my case. Without translation, you wouldn't read the majority of the world's literatures. You wouldn't, in India, you wouldn't read the majority of your own country's literatures. So it is absolutely an essential aspect of reading. And especially in a country like India, translation is very much the language of democracy. If you want to know about one another, you're going to be locked in an island unless you can reach out to know what others in the country who live their lives in different languages and cultures are thinking. And translation is the route that will get you there. You also asked about the difficulties, and there was something else.
We want to become translators, then what should we do?
Yeah, the difficulties are no more and no less than any form of writing, I imagine. You still have to write every word in the language into which you're translating, which is just the same as any form of writing. It might, in some ways, it's easier in that you already know, in some ways, you know what you want to put in the new language. But writing is also like that, right? You know what's in your head and you want to put it down in words. And sometimes it doesn't quite match. You write something and you look at it and say, that is not what I meant. So it's a constant process of negotiating between an idea, a concept, and finding the right words for it, which I guess is as difficult, as I said, as any form of writing. In any literary, non-literary, any form of using words.
Right.
Conversation is difficult. Language itself is a failure. How adequately does language actually convey what's in our heads? How many times have we just said, no, I'm not getting my point across?
Yes.
Right? So it's as difficult, and yet it is as essential to life as anything else. And as for starting out, thank you. I'm not a theorist. I don't know anything about translation studies. Thank you. I don't know anything about translation studies really, except what little I've read and been very excited by over the past few years. Um, how do you start singing? There are two ways, right? One is you go to a school and you start doing the sare gama and you start going through the formal steps, right? The other is you just start singing and you listen to yourself and someone says, that's very good, why don't you try some more? Someone says, that's awful, please stop singing. And then you don't stop singing, you just choose a different audience, but you keep singing nevertheless. So I would say it's the same with translation.
So that is where the bathroom singer concept came in, that you're singing for yourself.
Yeah,
So can there be bathroom translator?
of course. Absolutely. I think everyone should be a bathroom translator. Well, you know what I mean. You should certainly translate, but my point also is that you're already doing it without knowing it. When you live in India, your life is lived in translation. You're forever living in a world where at least 2 to 3 languages are being used. You are absorbing what you're listening, and then you're putting it out there in a combination of languages. Sometimes you don't even speak one language end to end. You do what's called code switching, right? You're speaking in Odia and suddenly you'll throw in a Hindi word, you'll throw in an English word, and so on. And the reason you will do it is that you find that those words are better equipped to convey the idea that you're trying to put
Message
forward.
of ideas.
Yeah. So at that point, Odia fails, English takes over. At one point, English fails and Odia takes over. Even when
Yes.
you're speaking in English, some words you will use you'll borrow from a different language. So we are translating all the time anyway. It's just a matter of acknowledging it and formalizing it in sitting down to put it down on your computer screen or your paper or your phone, wherever you choose to write.
Right. That language, English, like Hindi and English together.
Yeah, I don't even know what English is. What is English?
And sometimes, because the concept of spoken language being neutrally accented came with this outsourcing agencies. Those who started doing business outsourcing, they started talking about, oh, आदमी अंग्रेजी बोल रहा है लेकिन तेलुगु में बोल रहा है, English है. So he is speaking English in Telugu.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful how languages come together. You know, my colleague Rita Kothari at Ashoka University, she makes this point. She says if you start traveling from the extreme eastern part of India, somewhere in Arunachal Pradesh, there, and you travel westwards all the way across to Gujarat, you will not be able to say where one language changes into another. It
Right.
just keeps changing ever so slightly till suddenly you find that you've abandoned most of the words you had in one language and you moved into a different one. But it's not an abrupt shift. There are areas, there are parts of Bihar where the original languages, which were then rudely, by the way, all this talk about, sorry for throwing in an aside, but we talk so much about decolonization these days. The first act of decolonization should be to abandon Hindi in that case, because Hindi is a language created by the British. Hindi, as we know it, did not exist.
Yes, it didn't.
Yeah.
Maybe 200 years history.
Yeah, they created it as a language of administration using a version of Khadi Boli, right? But you had Maithili, you had Braj Bhasha, you had a bunch of other languages,
Yes.
right? Stretching right across what we now call the Hindi speaking.
Avadhi and all that.
Each language was its own. So if you listen to Maithili, for example, if you're not paying attention, you'll think it's Bangla. Many borrowed words, intonations are similar, accents are similar, and so on.
Yes.
So languages, they just evolve slightly as you go along geographically. So this business of translation itself is overstated. When we think we are moving from one language to another, that we are making some kind of massive leap across a chasm, Suprita, is nothing like that. You are just actually taking something that already exists in all those languages, just bringing it to this.
Right. So I'm using this 20-30 minutes what we have as a masterclass in translation.
Nothing of this.
So going from the WH questions of what it is and where we are going ahead. So kind of with technology coming in and artificial intelligence and translations happening automatically from Google. Google has perhaps integrated more than maybe close to 100 languages. If you write here something, the another language, you can go there and then it will translate for you. So that is one. And this is now how machine is doing. Machine is being trained, kind of the machine learning, deep learning is being supported in a way that now artificial intelligence is becoming more and more effective and more and more efficient. And also in that sense, with the technology coming in, how do you see translation as a practice becoming and facing the challenge you see, or do you see this an opportunity? How do we live with technology in a way that translational practice and how they are going to work together, and work together?
Yes, thank you for that question. So first of all, we should keep in mind what we are trying to do. If we are trying to produce excellent translations, then the means are secondary. There need not be any kind of fetish which says that only humans must do it, or
Hmm.
AI can do this, or AI cannot do this, and so on. I would love a situation where a human translator can use AI very effectively and produce excellent translations. So far, AI has not got to the point where it can do it unaided. But also remember that AI never works unaided. AI always works with human prompts. It does not just decide that it is. In fact, an AI program is never going to say, I will now translate this book. Someone has to say, can you translate this book? Right? So it has to begin with a human being or someone's intent or decision.
Just to add to that
Yes.
point, I think there was a story in China. There was a robot which is automated, programmed by AI, and it rebelled against the founder or the owner of the robot, and it instructed automatically other small robots to join. Like unionism में हम करते हैं, like this is union, हम आज इसके खिलाफ हल्ला बोल बोलेंगे. तो the bigger robot instructs smaller robots, जो 5-7 और robots हैं, उनको बोलते हैं कि आज से हम काम नहीं करेंगे, strike में जाएंगे. Now, when I heard about that news, I tried to find out whether this is true or fake or something like that. But I discussed with someone, they're saying this is kind of the jurisprudence challenge that artificial intelligence and law have to navigate through. Anyway, you said that computer will not do on its own, but there are discussions happening that they might develop autonomous agency.
वो भी हो सकता है.
Agency.
Which is also fine. I
Right.
mean, if let's say a bunch of AI programs decide that we are going to translate the entire body of Sanskrit literature in India,
Mahabharata, Ramayana,
हाँ,
whatever,
तो
Bhagavad Gita.
अच्छी
like,
बात है.
करो.
I hope it happens. Now the point is that real quality literature does not reside in the dictionary meanings of words and phrases, right? That any machine will do excellently at very high scale, very quickly, large volumes it will handle perfectly. So that's a no-brainer. But real literature lies not in the words, meanings of the words themselves, but in what is not explicitly written there. Half of it lies in your reading of translation. And this is what brings me to my point, that translation is about reading. The translator is a very close, attentive reader of the text that they're translating. And then having read it, they then take their reading into words in another. I'm sure we will get to a point where an AI program will be able to do the same kind of reading. We are not there yet. If they have to do it, they have to learn from translators and readers, which I hope will happen. I really hope will happen, because so much of the literature of the world lies untranslated. It would be wonderful if it could be put into various languages so that you can now read any work in the language of your choice. Right. It will also do something very important. It will also take away this idea of the so-called original being sacrosanct. There is this notion that this is the original and it cannot be. And this fetishization also bothers me very much, because it is from there that ideas like this is untranslatable or something is lost in translation, these ideas emerge from there, which somehow reduces a work to only one thing. There's essentialism. You're saying the essence is lost. Typically, we hear that, right?
Yes.
I mean, how can a work have only one essence? A great work does not have a single essence. A great work is great precisely because everybody can read it their own way. Somebody once said that the best way to find out how good a book is to ask 10 people to summarize it. If they write very similar or identical summaries, it's a lousy book. Only if they write 10 different summaries do you know that it's a great book, because every book, what is a classic? Why is a classic 300, 500, 700,000 years later? Because we are reading it in a different way. Surely we are not reading even the Mahabharata or the Gita the way it would have been read or listened to back in the time when it was composed. And the greatness lies in the fact that we can read it and we can make something out of it. Right? So translation is about that reading and putting that reading out into the world in another language that some other people can then access.
Right.
There is no one perfect translation, one correct translation. It's not a crossword puzzle that there is only one solution. Absolutely not, right? Yeah. So this whole idea that the essence will be lost and the translation will never be as good as the original. They all misquote Robert Frost, who said poetry is what is lost in translation. He was not referring to the act of translation from one language to another.
as a practice. Yeah.
He was talking about the fact that we lose the poetry when it is formed in our head, because the poetry is out there and you're not able to get it.
Yeah.
And you remember in school there was this question that the teacher would ask: what is the poet trying to say? Yeah. If the poet is trying to say something, then have they failed? I mean, if you're going to reduce a poem to an essence like that, then it should have been written in prose to begin with. What the poet is doing is using rhythm, using images, using rhyme, using form, using suggestion, using oblique ideas. These do not rest, and people will say, I don't understand poetry. It's not something to understand. It is something to feel with your entire body. So true for prose. A great novel, you feel it as much in your solar plexus as you do in your head. It is not a scientific manual where you capture a formula and say, this is it.
Right.
So formula agar nikalna hai, so that AI can do perfect. Legal documents boliye, manuals boliye, instructions boliye, AI can and should do it.
Right.
But understanding what you mean is not just in your words alone.
Right.
Today, if you this is a simple exercise I do in my class. आप इनसे पूछेंगे, have you eaten? और इनसे पूछेंगे, have you eaten? Now, if you just take those three words in themselves, it can have only one meaning, right? Have, yani ki in the past, you, yani ki you, eaten, have you consumed some food, right? Khana kha liya kya, right? But what is the intent of your question? It depends on whom you're asking. If you're asking a child, then you're thinking, I wasn't there to give you the food. Has someone else given you the food? Have you eaten? Are you doing your usual stuff of not eating?
Apne se kha liya. Something.
If it's someone who works very hard, it means, I bet you forgot to eat. And so on. There are 500 different meanings, right? But the words are the same. Ye kisko pata chalega? Who will get the meaning? The reader. The reader will extract the meaning. Hai na? I really hope AI can do this. But right now, AI will need a prompt. AI को बताना पड़ेगा that translate this line, have you eaten, into Odia. Assume that it comes from a person like this and it is being asked of a person like this and this is their situation. Now you translate.
It's a mother asking to the child.
So mother is asking the child, have you eaten, at the end of a day when the child has come back from school and has the habit of skipping their tiffin. So ये सब लिखना आसान है कि just translate करना, right?
Just translate करना आसान.
Yeah, because you know what you want to say. So just say it. So that's what I'm getting at. These are the things that lie in the reading and your understanding of the context. This does not lie in the words themselves.
Right.
The literature lies in what is invisible.
Yes.
In the words. But what you are absorbing of it, the larger full picture you're creating.
हमारे लिटरेचर क्लास में टीचर बोलते थे कि कैन यू रीड बिटवीन द लाइंस. हमें समझ ही नहीं आता था. बिटवीन द लाइन मुझे है ही नहीं. What can we read? Right.
There used to be one very useful question in school, which was, who said this and to whom and when? It was important because then you knew the context of the statement.
Right. So coming back to another fundamental question of translation and translator, the person. Because if you look at now, we have started doubting the translations that the Germans did of the Vedas, whether it is Arthur Schopenhauer, Max Muller, perhaps Max Muller started the process, and we started doubting because they didn't come from the culture from where the text was written. So one doubt is this. And to add to that question, people who now look at Bhagavad Gita being translated or interpreted or commentaries being written, maybe initial commentary written by Shankara, Adi Shankara. And then there are several commentaries in modern times. Gandhi ji has written one, Tilak ji has written one, there are several people. So now people categorize them, as you said, there should be different translations. Are you from the school of sannyasa? Are you a sannyasi? So a sannyasi means, are you from Ramakrishna mission or Vivekananda has written, then I am going to read in that sense. If Gandhi has written, that means commentary, there will be political messaging there. So translator's position or locus standi, does that change how translation is perceived?
Yeah, as you said, I'm sure it is if you really assume that the translator has some kind of agenda or motive out there. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? You are basically saying, this is how I read this text, this is what this text means to me, and this is what I want it to mean to you. That's absolutely a valid reading and a valid translation. Now, if you think that, is this what the text was back then? Who knows? How do I know that Gandhi is wrong? How do I know that Max Muller is wrong? How do I know that Shankaracharya is wrong? I don't know it. right? So all I can do is I can read all their translations and their commentaries and then decide for myself what works for me, right? So yes, sure. If I know that there is, but I don't want to get into a fight of who is more right.
With that question that something is there, like does a translator recreate or reinterpret an author's voice? The ethics of translation, faithfulness versus creative liberty. So challenges in translating historical, mythological, deeply rooted cultural expressions. So how do we navigate this kind of translation?
So if I take that one point you said, faithfulness, fidelity versus creativity, I'm saying the two actually go together. To be faithful, you have to be creative because you are using a different medium. You're not rewriting the text in the same language.
No, not.
In fact, even if you were, you may have to use different words because language itself has changed.
Yes.
There's a famous story, and I never tire of telling this. The Pierre Menard, who rewrote Don Quixote by who else but Borges, who wrote this story about Pierre Menard rewriting the Don Quixote 400 years later in Spanish and using exactly the same words, identical words, punctuation, everything. But Borges shows that this version, when read 400 years later, means something quite different from what it would have meant to the reader 400 years ago.
Yes.
So, on the face of it, this is not even a translation. Identical words.
Reproduction.
So, yani ki, if you want the reader to read that text in a way similar to the way it was read 400 years ago, you have to use a different set of words, even though you're using ostensibly the same language. Right. Then there is no such thing as the same language anyway. The language itself keeps changing over periods, right? So, what are you being faithful to? That's the question.
The medium or the message?
You are being faithful to your own reading. That is the only thing you can be faithful.
Right.
Right. Now, as a translator, of course, it is your objective to make your own reading as full of possibilities as the first version of the text was. If the first version of the text could be read in 50 different ways, then ideally your translation should also be capable of being read in 50 different ways instead of in only one or two of those. So your reading as a translator, I would say, is slightly different from any intelligent, informed readers in the way that you are much more aware of the possibilities of the text rather than pinning it down to one particular thing.
Right.
Right. And that is what you have to be true to. Again, a seemingly trite example, and maybe this is apocryphal, maybe this is not even true, but it's a great story. In Russian, apparently, anyone here know Russian? You know Russian? You've read Russian, I'm sure. So in Russian, apparently, there is no word for blue. There's light blue, there's dark blue, and so on, but there is no blue, right? Now, you are translating a text from any language into Russian. उसमें लिखा है कि नील, आसमान नीला है, sky was blue. Which blue are you going to make it, right? Right. Because if you have to choose a word, you'll have to end up choosing either light blue or dark blue. Now, in doing so, are you being unfaithful? Because there was a concept of blueness there, which you are now reducing the possibility. You're not saying which blue. But jisne likha tha, they have not said it was light blue or dark blue or indigo or purple or whatever. Blue.
Just wrote blue.
Just blue. So now you're making a choice, right? So that your language is forcing you to make that choice.
The context,
right? So now, are you distorting it? Are you being unfaithful? You have to answer for yourself. Or will you find a creative solution within that language? Now, you may come up with something where you say, I'm just giving a wild example. The sky was the color of the sea. Let's say you say something like that, right? You leave it to the reader's imagination.
Right.
I'm so slow what kind of blue it is, right? Now, someone who compares them word for word will say, hey, this is a distortion, this is creative liberties. Who's asking you to be so poetic? Right. Stick to blue. Why do you want to talk about the sea? But there's a reason you might want to.
Right.
So, and in that way, you might end up going closer to the blueness, idea of blueness that that text was talking about. So these creative things will happen all the time because you are in a new language. आप धोती छोड़ के पैंट पहनेंगे, so you cannot wear the pair of trousers like a dhoti. No, you have to wear them in the way that trousers is. You can wrap trousers around yourself. मैं धोती पहन रहा हूँ, तो फिर धोती पहनो. But if you are forced to wear trousers, then you have to wear them in the way that trousers are supposed to be worn. And you are being true then to the idea of covering the lower part of your. That is what you are being faithful. So your translation of wearing a dhoti, and when you translate it into wearing trousers, is being faithful to the intent of wearing the dhoti, not to the physical appearance or the visual look, right?
One Indic theory of translation that people talk about, that already सोसाइटी में, एटमोस्फियर में नॉलेज एग्जिस्ट करता है। आ रहा हूँ, ऋषि बिकमिंग मंत्र द्रष्टा, उन्होंने देखा, ओम भूर्भुवस्व तस्य वितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो न प्रचोदयात्, दैट code exists in the atmosphere. The rishi decoded it and translated it, wrote something कि ये मैंने मंत्र निकाला। ये मंत्र कहां से निकाला? मंत्र दृष्टा होके निकाला। So did the rishi see it as it is, or he had to translate that to my understanding? So that is one question. I'm just a curiosity. That is one. So what happened there? Did the rishi see a code or a music, like someone says from a Dambru, the entire Natya Shastra or the music came? So there is a code in the universe. It is about decoding. So is the translator decoding what he or she looks at or sees? That is one question. Second related question to this, in anthropology, we call ethnography as a practice, that we immerse and submerge ourselves and try to understand the community we study. So when a translator is coming from one linguistic expertise and trying to translate to another linguistic platform or language, so is it required to be an ethnographic submerge required into that kind of a tradition, kind of that, or the person can stay, withdraw, and still do that justice?
So the first question, so
Decode.
all writing actually, if you look at it, began with an attempt to decode the word of the so-called creator. The Bible was an attempt to decode the word of God. The Quran begins also with, and the whole idea is God wrote the universe. So there is this notion that there is this invisible writing out there, and we are just trying to put it in a language that human beings can understand. And therefore, the very first writing is an act of translation. And also, if the centuries of debate over what it is supposed to mean is to be taken seriously, then you have to say that translation and writing is by nature a failure. Because you can get closer and closer, but you can never say this is it, this is the definitive version, right? Physicists do just this. They decode the universe and translate it into a form of learning that from which we can understand how the universe works. Now,
kind of Einstein principle, E is equal to MC square, something like that. So he's trying to.
Yeah. So the whole idea is that there are certain laws in operation within the universe, laws whose existence can eventually be proven, first through theory and then through practical experiments. Einstein posited the theory of relativity almost 100 years before it was conclusively proved through experiments. Yes. Now that, you could say that's an fantastic act of translation, right? He studied the universe and he wrote down something. And he said, this represents what's going on there. That's translation, right? And someone else, it needed loads of work later on to come and prove it. Now, personally, I'm very skeptical of the idea of God and the truth of the universe being written somewhere up there and only a small group of people having access to it and therefore being able to. But if you look at it, it's no different from scientists trying to decode the universe. So, it's kind of similar. So that act of translation goes on all the time, right? There is no stopping it. And the whole idea is that we are always in search of the truth. And then we are trying to find the words for that truth and putting it down. So when I'm translating, I'm trying to find the truth of one text and putting it down in another language, right? Or in a language in which I think it can be put across. Now, does the truth exist outside of that language is the question. There is a notion that a text is so wedded to the language in which it is first written that it cannot exist outside it. So therefore, it will be lost in translation. Again, this to me is a form of fetishization. What's there does not belong only to that language. Right. I think we have seen enough of translated works and the joy and wealth we have derived from them to realize that this is absolute bunkum, right? There's something that lies deeper than the language, and that something can then come into various languages. Right. Your job is to get to what lies behind it and then put it in other language. So, ethnography and immersing yourself in the culture of the text and so on.
The language and the text.
Yeah. So of course it would be great. It would be great if that were possible. But I'm arguing that it is not even possible. How are you going to understand the entire context in which a text was written? How are you going to close the historical gap? One, there is the geographical and sociological and anthropological gap. But alongside with it, there is the historical gap.
And if there is no historical gap, but it is a contemporary fiction or an autobiography or a life story of a person who writes in Malayalam,
Sure. So certainly it will help as translator if you know more about what's going on there. You will catch many of the references. You will catch the nuances. Every time, let's say a character is named Sita in a work from any Indian language, there is some resonance somewhere.
Yes.
Right? Now, if you're coming in cold from some other country, from Japan, let's say, and you think Sita is just another name, then surely you're going to little bit of the richness will not be reflected in your work. Possibly. So to that extent, but if a great work of literature were only to be a great work of sociology and anthropology, then I assure you it would not survive.
Right.
Right? Great works of anthropology have survived, of course. But then that's because they are also great literary works.
Yes.
Not just because of their content, as it were.
Right.
So there is something more that the reader and the translator brings in. These things are useful, but eventually they will add a little bit to the value. They're
Not the cake, but the icing on the cake.
well, the icing is useless. We are not supposed to eat the icing, so I won't call it the icing. But it's the last layer, yeah. But you will. I mean, all happy families are alike. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. So we all go wow, 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 right? Tolstoy, wow. But this is not Tolstoy. This is Constance Garnett, an American lady who sat in a garden in America and read the Russians and wrote the translations by hand and tossed off sheets of paper on the grass. Right? Now, was she steeped in Russian anthropology? I don't think so. Right? Is Tolstoy's work, has it been considered any less great because we read it through Constant? Now we read it through other translators as well. But generations have read it through Constant Garnett's beloved translations. So are they any poorer? No. So practice, while in theory it would be great, practice shows us that it is not really it's a nice to have ingredient, but it's not a crucial ingredient.
Right. Last question before we open this up to our audience. Gen Z and translator literature, the new wave of engagement. So this is the title of my question. How does Gen Z interact with translator literature? The growing popularity of webtoons, K-dramas, and global literary translations. And also in India, you will have Tamil movies being translated or dubbed, we call it dubbed, into Hindi, and vice versa as well. So where do you see the role of translation, not just about textual translation, but translation and cross-translation broadly?
Yeah, it's a part of life. You're absolutely right. Gen Z and then further generation
Alpha and all that,
and so on.
and beta.
They are not rooted in particular cultural islands anymore, thanks to the fact that media is coming at them from all sides. And in with their origins in multiple cultures and languages, and then they're either going out and absorbing those things in other languages, or they're making them their own. My generation spoke much more in one language when they spoke. Like English was our lingua franca much more than it is for today's Gen Z. They will easily slip in and out of 2 or 3 different languages.
I will ask this last question. I'm using this as a masterclass. In one IGNU, like in book, they translate from English to Hindi. One English writes that Wall Street Journal. The Hindi translate this Diwar Gali Patrika.
Acha hai. Because it makes you think differently. Right? And I think this is great. I mean, at one level, you'd say, Acha, Wall Street Journal. This is fun. But dekho, what does Diwal Gali Patrika mean? It completely changes its format to something that's literally written. It could be graffiti. It could be stuff pinned up on a wall. I think that's fantastic. That is how language, words, ideas, everything gain new meaning and they evolve.
One anchor on a television trying to read Xi Jinping, they read 11 Jinping.
Just like,
11 Jinping.
I don't know why she was sad. I mean, if I read X and I read it as 11, is it my fault? I've been taught all my life to read it as 11. So that's fine. And why should the gentleman in question be upset either?
Shouldn't be, ideally.
No need, right?
Right. So last question is this.
The third last question.
What is the most challenging translation that you've done?
Whichever translation I'm working on at any point of time seems to me one I will never be able to pull off.
Anything that you had a cultural dissonance or a little bit of challenge or something that you would like to share with someone who would like to take, that is a little takeaway that as a translator, you normally face these challenges, 1, 2, 3, something like that. But I'm trying to reduce it to 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so for me, I think challenging Bengali poetry was the most, translating Bengali poetry was the most challenging. Simply because, not because it's Bengali, would be true for any language, because so much of it rests not just in the words and the lines, but the rhythm, the melody, the alliteration,
Symbolism.
The symbolism fir bhi theek hai. It is the uniqueness of the language. The tools, the way the poet has used the language, and to create a corresponding version in a completely different language needs far more imagination. And I really don't have that kind of imagination. So I had to work very hard to try and reproduce the play that was going on in one language into another.
Thank you so much. Any questions quickly? Any remarks and questions quickly? Be quicker, to the point.
Thanks, sir. It was a really insightful discussion. I wanted to ask you, about the two examples you gave, a slight slant on that. You gave the example of Sita, which has a resonance, and the color blue in Russian. And I was wondering about the morality of a language. Like each language, I would suppose, has its own kind of moral universe. And in writing my own book, when I was translating a lot of interviews from Hindi into English, of pandits and babas, and they would say Pavitra Nadi, and I would write pure, and sometimes I thought it didn't quite have that resonance. How much of translating do you have to do when you have to explain, or do you hope the reader picks it up from the translation itself? How much of translation is explaining, in short, is what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I try to use minimal explanation. Sometimes you use a stealth gloss to make it look like it's part of the text, although it's not. You've just slyly introduced a little bit of an explanation. Excuse me. But mostly, I personally don't do it. Again, my logic is, let's say an American comes and eats biryani. So he will enjoy it, but he will not eat it the way we eat biryani. It will not fire the same emotions and memories and joy and nostalgia and so on, right? So why should I expect them to do it? So my translation is similar. It is, you are reading a book in a different language, in a different culture. So distance, there will be that distance. And it's up to you how much you want to bridge that. I'm not going to go and make it look like it's invented in your backyard.
And I guess the careful reader always has Google. Sorry, the curious reader has Google these days if they want to investigate.
But I mean, are you going to read or are you going to Google? As it is, people have 2 screen lives, right? While they're watching a game, watching a movie, they're playing a game. And now on Instagram, the memes themselves have become 2 screens. So something's going on the upper half, something else is going on in the lower half. I would rather you do only one thing at a time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.